Hey, folks, this is Leadership Talks with Barrett. I'm joined today with Veronda Bellamy. We're talking about mental health. We're spending the month here at the Empowered Living Church discussing mental health. We're looking at the holistic approach to doing ministry. And what we're finding is in this pandemic, quite often it tends to be some extra stress, maybe some, life changes. And so that being the case, God wants to be us to live whole lives, full lives, and lives that can be reflections of Him. And so, we work with our blood pressure, our weight, our diabetes, our varied other illnesses. We deal with COVID-19, the coronavirus, a variety of other things, but quite often we as a community just don't pause and deal with our own individual mental health. And so we're joined today with Veronda Bellamy. She is a mental health professional. And I want to ask the question to Miss Veronda Bellamy, simply but profoundly. Who is Veronda Bellamy? Let's talk about that. Who is she?
Hello. Thank you for having me. Again, I am Veronda Bellamy. I am an executive coach who specializes in helping women understand how trauma has impacted their lives. I just happen to be a mental health therapist. So often women get stuck in life, and typically it's because of some type of traumatic experience and they don't know it. And because they don't know it, they never reach out for help. So I specialize in helping people go from stuck to unstoppable. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. That's good. That's good. Now, I mean, you're wearing a variety of hats, and that's good. That's promising. Now, I know, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but there's been a little. Well, you tell me how has Corona, if at all, affected your life?
Yeah, so I am about 14 days post COVID at this point. So
Awesome.
yeah, my
That
home,
means you're
my
free. You're clear. After 10 days, you're
I
clear.
am clear. I am
Yes.
COVID free at this point. My home
Awesome.
survived it. My husband, actually, I was diagnosed first, and then my husband was diagnosed about 2 days later, 2 to 4 days later after my diagnosis, and so we went into quarantine and everything. And it was unreal. I really thought I was going to die. Like I really thought I was gonna die because in the beginning I really didn't have any symptoms, and then all of a sudden, like I got my test back one day, and then like I didn't have any symptoms, and then all of a sudden that night I got hit with symptoms, and I ended up going to the ER, and I
Oh
went
wow.
into the ER thinking, oh gosh, I'm never gonna make it out. Or what have you. So I called my mom, my husband couldn't go with me. So it was me. I had to take myself and checked in, and they did all types of checks on me to make sure I didn't have any type of pneumonia or any of that.
Right.
And then they pretty much was like, well, at this point, we don't see any symptoms warranting you to stay. We're going to discharge you with a cough suppressant. And if your symptoms get worse, call us and our virtual hospital will check in with you periodically. So that's pretty much how it happened. I came back home and started, really quarantining and taking Tylenol to keep my fever down. And the worst of the symptoms was for me just having a fever, having body aches and sweating that lasted for maybe 2 days, and very, very, very fatigued. That's been a consistent thing. And so at this point, I'm back and feeling like myself again
Wow.
by
That's
the grace of
by the
God.
grace of God. By the grace of God. Now, I'm gonna throw this out there. How has that impacted you and your work? How's your work been impacted by that?
Yeah, so with me having COVID, it did impact my work, but it came at a very timely time. Actually, I was preparing to go to Jamaica, and that's how I found out. So, in order to go to Jamaica, you had to get tested beforehand, in order
Interesting.
for them to let you in. And so, we went to get tested, in preparation of traveling to Jamaica, and found out that I was positive for COVID. So I had to stop the test, stop that whole, not the test, but stop the whole travel. And so that was going to be for business and pleasure. So that kind of it impacted all of that. And so, but I was already planned to have that next week and a half off anyway because I was going out of town. So it came. If it was gonna come, it should have came at that time because I already had the time already blocked off my calendar.
Oh, so it worked out
It worked
in a
out
sense. It worked
in
out
a
in a
sense,
sense.
in a
In
weird
a
way.
sense. In a weird way. And I didn't have these questions prepared, but I like where we're going with this.
Yeah.
So mentally, how
Uh-huh.
did it impact you, if at all? If at
Yeah.
all?
It mentally in the beginning, like I said, it really had me feeling like I was going to die. Because you look at the news, right? You look
Mm-hmm.
at the numbers that's, up, down, according to the president, it's really not even worth talking about, but it's real. And so when you get the diagnosis, initially you're kind of like, oh my gosh, like you look at all the people that's passed away, the death toll and all of that, and you're like, probably going to be in that number. And immediately you go into, I went into prayer. I'm like, Lord, just protect me, protect my home, protect my family, from this. And so from there, I spoke to my husband about it. And initially for the first 2 days, I was quarantining by myself. So I was in the bedroom all alone. My husband had to hold the house down, and he did. Shout out to Nick Bellamy. He held it down, made sure that I was being
Shout out to
fed.
Nick.
Yeah, he's on top of it. And the baby was being fed. Like he held the entire house down. I felt so bad. I was alone. I was, really like, what can I do to feed myself to make sure that I don't go into this negative space because you're by yourself? It's very scary. And so for me, it was prayer, talking to my mom, my sister on the phone, reading the word, finding scriptures, remembering the 23rd Psalm, and speaking that out loud. And so that's really how it impacted me. It's very scary when you get that diagnosis and you're like, oh gosh, like, is this going to be it for me? And so it's just, all glory to God that I was able to make it through. My entire family was able to make it through because my mom ended up being diagnosed and my sister through all of this.
Wow.
So it was kind of a family effect. So everybody has pretty much made it out of COVID by the grace of God. So it does impact impact you mentally, and you really have to rely on your spirituality, your faith, and your belief in God that you're going to make it through.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I want people I want people to hear that your testimony. I guess it's testimony because it's the reality of that we all go through regardless of who we are. I mean,
Yeah.
this is real, and you can come out on the other side of it. It's like a storm that comes and ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's common for people to experience mental illness. I'm gonna ask you the question: is it common for people to experience
Yeah,
mental
yeah,
illness?
yeah. It's very common. I think that everyone has experienced some form of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
It's very common. It's life comes at us. We're hit with different obstacles. We have to constantly make decisions. We're having to be aware, be alert. And one thing can really throw you off kilter. It's really how you deal with it. So I think for everyone, and nobody is exempt from it, you've dealt with some form of depression, whether you are a minister, whether you're a therapist. Even therapists have therapists. You know what I mean? So whether you are a coach of sorts, you are a teacher, like you psychiatrists, you've dealt with some form of mental illness, and it's the difference is being able to how you respond to it, having the right coping skills in place to make sure that you're able to move forward. Sometimes depending on the severity, what type of diagnosis you have, if there is a diagnosis, some people really need assistance to kind of guide them through. We live life from our own lens and from our own experiences.
Right.
And oftentimes it causes us to be stuck in life and we don't know how to move forward. And then you're in this perpetual cycle of dealing with bipolar disorder or depression or schizophrenia. And you either don't have a formal diagnosis for it, or you have a diagnosis and you're not getting the proper treatment that you really should be having. So yes, it can affect everyone. And for the most part, it has affected everyone. I don't know many people that can honestly say they have never felt doom and gloom. Like it's just a normal part of life.
I don't think
I don't think
anybody
anybody
has either.
has either.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's good for people to understand that it's that common, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
that common to have it, and it's not a problem in having it. It's the problem is not dealing with it when you do have it. And I know we talked about COVID and how
Mm-hmm.
challenging it's been, really for you, your family, and this in America in general. But we're also in the next couple of days going to have an election.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. How has the election impacted what you do? Is it something
Oh man.
relevant?
Yeah, it's very relevant. I hear often, so often, the impact of this election. I like to say we're dealing with multiple types of pandemics. There's the racial pandemic, then there's COVID. Coronavirus. That's also a pandemic. Like we're dealing with multiple pandemics at this time, and the president that we have at hand is not making the situation any worse or any better. I'm sorry. He's made everything worse during this time. And people are afraid. They are terrified that their sons are going to die. I literally have had several African American women to call my office saying, I'm afraid for my son's life. I don't know what's going to happen to him. How do I deal with this? You know what I mean? And it's a real thing for a lot of Black women and men at the same token. So we're dealing with, this whole election right now, the racial pandemic, COVID-19, all of this stuff is affecting everybody in ways that it's just uncharted territory at this point for everyone. And during this time, I find myself relying even more on hearing from God on how to handle these situations, how to counsel people appropriately through what they're dealing with. And my caseload has grown significantly. I have clients all over the U.S. that's calling me at this point for either coaching or therapy or a combination of both. So it's really, it's a real thing, and it's affecting everyone significantly.
Yeah. As a pastor, I have the pleasure. I'm gonna say pleasure. I have the responsibility. It's not necessarily pleasure, but I have the responsibility to hear a variety of people's wins and their victories, and then when they're struggling as well. And for the very first time in my history of being a minister, I've had to deal with the thought process of suicide of individuals. And just last week, we had a conversation with pastors, and a pastor shared the fact that he had struggled in his youth with the thought of suicide and how he had to deal with it and how they dealt with it. And he continuously seeks assistance to manage his life. He seeks therapy every week just to manage his life. It's a real thing. I talked to one pastor, and he and his wife have been going through marital counseling for the last 30 plus years. And they see it as how they maintain a healthy marriage. But so this, when I was in high school, the closest thing to suicide that I experienced was my senior year. A guy was towards graduation, somebody I didn't know, who didn't look like me, committed suicide across the street from the high school. That was horrendous. But now I'm hearing it more. So the question I have, why do people choose to live once they consider suicide as an option? What have you heard? How do you deal with people who even deal with the topic of suicide?
Yeah, suicide is real, and it's I think it's a symptom of mental illness that is really swept even deeper under the rug. Like you can feel low and depressed and sad, but you don't want to talk about, oh my gosh, I'm having these thoughts of harming myself, and it's a real thing for a lot of people. And so often whenever you're in that place of that dark valley, that just, just in a place of not being able to, not knowing how to move forward and feeling stuck.
Hmm.
Oftentimes people decide that they're going to commit suicide because they don't have any other options. Like they don't know what else to do. When they get stuck like that, I have actually a segment coming up where I'm going to be doing a talk. Is it no in November
Okay.
on suicide prevention? But
Yes.
yeah, it's a real thing, and most people, when they act on it because they don't have any other outlet. Their pain is so severe, so
Mm.
painful, that they don't know what else to do. They just want the pain to go away. They just want it to go
That's
away.
what you said. Just want the
And
pain to go away.
and the only result they have is, I'm going to take my life. And so that could be in many different forms, as you know. And so for those that decide not, they usually decide not when they're able to hear, something internally that says, look, you got kids, you have a spouse, you have responsibilities, you're a pastor of a church, you have your leader, people looking up to you, you have parents. So usually those responsibilities are, their loved ones are what causes them not to actually move forward with the thought. So often it's a passive thought for some people. So they have the
Hmm.
thought and they're like, well, okay, whatever, I'm just going to keep going. Um, and so I urge anyone that's having a thought, even if it's a passive thought and you have it periodically, you've never acted on it, it's time for you to definitely make an appointment with a therapist when you're starting to have those thoughts. And when, if it gets to the point to where you're really starting to make a plan, it's then time for you to call 911. You don't have to tell anyone. Reach out for help, so that you can, live here another day, to make it through whatever you're going through. There is a purpose. I believe that we all have purpose. We all have
Yes.
significance. We all have relevance. And your life has meaning and value. You matter, and so no matter how difficult it becomes, I implore you to reach out for help, so that you can get through and onto the other side.
And I think that's so important that we recognize we need help, but also
Hmm.
when people understand it's common for
Hmm.
people to need help, and it's okay to get help. And
Hmm.
people who struggle, who lose, are the people who keep it within themselves and don't share it. I mean,
Yeah.
right now, I think when I was when I was a counselor in grad school, I had to serve as a sophomore counselor at this college in Massachusetts, and was elite university, and 65% plus of the undergrads seek counsel, have a regular therapy session, and these are some of the smartest students in the world. But over
Yeah.
65%
Mhm.
seek therapy. So if the smart people are getting therapy, then I mean, why not everybody? It's so common. So I think
Yeah.
it's a healthy thing to do, to have someone to speak to. I share at least an office with the pastor here in the headquarters from another church, and he and I go back and forth and talk all the time. I said,
Yeah.
man, I don't need to stop doing this to you. I'm gonna go ahead and get me a therapist, because I know I'm wearing you out, because you wear me out. So I mean,
And I know
but it's
you
good
are
for
wearing
us.
them out too.
Right. We wear each other out, but it's good for us to have someone to talk to
Yeah.
that can relate to what we're going through as pastors during the pandemic, which is a very unique situation
Yeah.
that that we find ourselves in. And I'm thankful for it, because it gives me a challenge. I'm telling God I'm thankful for it. But man, God, if you could end it any time, we'd be more than happy to end the
Yeah.
pandemic. We appreciate it so very much. I'm gonna put that
You
out there
know,
for
I
God.
I think the racial pandemic, I've been saying for years
Yes.
that the whole race thing was going to be a national conversation, right? It was going to
Mm-hmm.
be, and now it's this global conversation of the world is talking about
Right.
the impact of racism. It's so deep. It's such a demonic force that has permeated the entire world for centuries, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
so I have a team that's over in Pakistan, and they even understand it. So Black Lives Matter is even relevant over there with them. They understand it, and they better understand it
Wow.
if they're doing my marketing. So you're speaking, you're speaking for me and for my culture. I need for you to understand it and get it right. So I think it's taken, as painful as it is, and to all that's passed away, from Breonna Taylor to George Floyd, may they rest in peace.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's taken all of this, and it's going to be more that's going to come for us to have this racial conversation that's been swept under the rug and not dealt with for centuries at hand.
Yes.
And so it's a painful process, but I see progression. I know it's painful, and and we don't want to really deal with it, but I see some progression coming from all the things that we've witnessed. Every time a murder takes place, it's another opportunity for the world to see what's really been happening to Blacks as a whole for forever, right? And after so long, you really can't turn a blind eye to what's going on. You have to deal with it. And when George Floyd could not breathe, when he lost his life on national TV, so many people, it kind of punched like a lot of people in the gut, like, wow, this is real. Like, people started waking up. People started being aware. Now I've had conversations with white people who are like, what do I need to do? What am I missing? How do I connect better with the Black community? And I'm like, how is it that we understand you and your struggle, but you've never taken out the time to understand us and our struggle? How is that? Help me understand that. So start with that question, and then from there, find a way to really put yourself in a situation where you have to get a real answer to that question so that you have a better understanding. And then you can pass that on down to your people, your children, whoever's in your circle. It's all about being open to really being around a culture and understanding a culture. That's the only way that things are going to change. So in dealing with the racial pandemic, it's been so painful, but I think we are making progress. I really do. I don't know what's going to happen next week. When is it? November 3rd is election day.
November 3rd. November 3rd.
I don't know what's going to happen. I know that my house has voted. My family, I made sure my brother got his butt out there and he voted. Like, my family has voted. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that for those that believe in God, we're covered no matter what's going on. So through a pandemic, I found my business has grown. I've changed my whole business model, but my business still has survived and thrived through all of this. So I think that, just really having that faith walk and relying on God. And I know people are like, well, I'm just tired. Like, is God even here? Yes, he is here.
Yes.
He's still here.
No doubt.
He's still in the midst.
No doubt.
And
this
so
is still his world. And I think it just stretches our faith. I was recently, in the last few days, was down in Charleston, North Carolina, and I was on this bus tour, Black Church Rocks bus tour, and we're traveling around to 14 cities in 10 days. And I'm taking a pause to do Sunday morning service and get back on again. But we went to Mother Emanuel AME Church, where the 9 people lost their lives from a white supremacist, and 5 people survived that. And the pastor in our public gathering, he was asked to say some words, and he said one of the first things he said was, every time we pause to say the names of the 9 who were killed by white supremacy. Man, and I'm thinking, like, to do that every time you get up to talk, to remind people of what you're going. I mean, that is sacred ground. I mean, he said this is sacred ground, and so we call it the names of the 9. He said every name, and the 5 who were injured as well. And I'm standing there in a church, realizing that this is not always a safe place. That's the first time I realized this is not necessarily a safe place as the sun started going down and the times that we are in. But to have that in my mind every day as a pastor, as a parishioner, as someone in the community, that has to add a certain level of mental strain.
Yeah.
It has to, unless you find peace of God in God. That's the only way you can think. That's the only thing I can find comfort in, knowing that. And I stood there and the sun went down. Is that I'm protected by the goodness and greatness of God. And without that, I would be open
Yeah.
to violence. It's
Yeah.
just amazing. I want to transition because now, as we have about 4 minutes left. Students are still in school and they're about to go back to school, and teachers are dealing with a lot. What advice would you give a teacher about interacting with students who have a mental illness or who are dealing with this racial or virus pandemic?
Yeah. So if you have a kid, you're noticing, odd behavior, or the kid is struggling, I would encourage you to reach out to that child one on one, to try to figure out, what's going on in the home. Does the child need anything? Also, a lot of times schools have therapists within the school system itself, that you can, after you've had the conversation, connect the child to. I would make it urgent. I wouldn't let it be something that you notice for, little Johnny's been acting up this week, or he's acting up next week, or now it's been a month. No, when you notice it the first time, it's time then for you to address what's going on and having that one-on-one conversation with the child, and then letting the parent know and getting a therapist involved if necessary. Do not let it just kind of linger.
Right.
Make it urgent, because if he's acting out, there's a reason for that. There's always cause and effect, right? So something's going on that's affecting that child.
And and I think it's good for teachers to know that this. 'Cause I've been a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and quite often I don't think we connect students misbehaving with a mental strain, mental stress, and the
Mm-hmm.
like. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes teachers think they are just raised by bad parents.
Yeah.
And quite often I believe parents believe their kids are angels, not realizing you're raising a bad child. I mean, it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
But more than just, but maybe that child needs to have some issues addressed
Mm-hmm.
that's been overlooked. It's not necessarily their intellect is the problem.
Right.
It's these other things that are holding them back from excelling and being successful.
Yeah.
So,
Very.
what books are you reading? What books are you reading there, Veronda?
Yeah. So one book that I'm reading right now, actually, it's upstairs on the bed, I think. But The Missing Ingredient, that's a really good book. I don't know if you've ever heard of The Four Agreement. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't. No,
The Four Agreement, you've never heard of that book?
I haven't heard of that book. Oh,
Man, that's like my
oh,
staple book.
I read, but I haven't read that one.
Yeah, please go and get that. It's a really good book. It's all about understanding, really how to respond to people, different types of people. It's a
Hmm.
very powerful book. It gives you a different perspective on how to respond to people. It's not a real thick book, but it's a great
Uh-huh.
read. It's very, very popular book too. It's been around forever. I heard the other day that there's another book, a sequel to it called The Fifth Agreement, which is a good book. And then also there's another book that I learned about on, I think it was TBN, and it's basically the Bible and business. So Bible scriptures that you can apply to business. That's
Excellent.
another really good book to read.
Excellent, excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. Well, it's been a great conversation. We've come to a
Thank you.
close, but I want to give you a chance to tell people, what do you want people to take away from today's conversation? What's the nugget you want
Yeah.
people to walk away with?
I really want you to know that mental illness is real. And because it is so real, it's just like going in and getting a checkup, your annual checkup for, your body, and making sure you don't have any diabetes, high blood pressure, or any of that. You need to get your mental checked up. So when you go into therapy, you're going to have an assessment done. Typically, from that assessment, you're going to be provided a diagnosis, if there is a diagnosis, and then your treatment kind of comes from there. It should be as common for you as you just going in to get a checkup because you have a cold. My clients, I like to put them in the mind frame of, look, this is something that I need to do. And it's nothing for one of my clients to come back and be like, yeah, now I used to be afraid of therapy, or I didn't think it would work. But now anything that's going on, I feel like if I need a tune up, I'm going to come into my therapist. So a lot of my clients go into what I call maintenance mode after they've reached their treatment goals, and they do really well. And so that's my biggest takeaway is to know that, or my biggest message that I would like to leave with you all is to know that therapy is real, and it can be very helpful. If you have a bad experience, don't give up. You can always reach out to me. I am a therapist, a mental health therapist. I consider myself to be pretty good. I do okay. I'm versed in treating trauma. So I think that we've all dealt with trauma. And oftentimes trauma stops you from being able to move forward. I have a 501c as well called Bridging the Gap of America, which is a state licensed agency. We're kind of changing how we do business with that. But we have treated thousands of clients. The agency grew very rapidly. And so I'm kind of venturing out, and I am now a therapist and getting licensed in many states at this point. So like I said, I have clients all over the US at this point I'm working with, and I do business development too. So some people reach out to me for, for starting up a business and all of that. So this is my ministry. These are the tools. These are the gifts that God has blessed me with, and I don't take it lightly. I think that everyone that comes to me is an assignment from God, and that is how I treat it. So I am Veronda Bellamy. You can find me on all social media at Veronda Bellamy. My website is verondabellamy.com.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you for joining us today. Miss Veronda, we're going to let you go on and enjoy the remainder of your day. This is Leadership Talks. Thank you again for joining us. Be sure to find Veronda. Her name is very easily at Veronda Bellamy. You can find her on social media, and her website is the same. Is that .com? VerondaBellamy.com. There it is. All right. Thanks for joining us, Veronda.
Thank you.
Yes. This is Pastor Barrett of the Empowered Living Church. We want to thank everyone for joining us here. Come back every Sunday in the month of November. We're going to deal with mental health, and we're going to tackle that, and we'll make sure that everybody is whole, healthy, and living their best life. All right? Every Sunday, 7 p.m. But you also can go to leadershiptalks.io, and you can catch other episodes from the past as we prepare for new ones each and every day. Remember this, go out and vote. Vote. If you haven't, make certain that your voice is heard. All right? Again, this is Pastor Barrett Berry of the Empowered Living Church, and this is Leadership Talks. Have a blessed day.